So if you have your book, if you're going for scholarships, it's this guy, right? And I'll say it again just because I love being transparent and clear how this works. One of the major ways I'm able to do scholarships is because I pre-buy these books. And since I'm the author, I get this book for, like, as an example, around 20 bucks. We sell it for 40. That means I make 20. But I don't make anything because there's no salaries in this ministry. The money goes into a bank for scholarships. And when someone completes it, the money goes to them for the scholarship. So there's no salaries, nobody getting paid anything. This is my way to figure out how I can have money available for young people. Then I have 3 or 4 people who donate, that contribute, so that just builds it up more. Okay, so transparency. Buy the book off the web, it's fine. It's fine. I'm just saying that when I buy them and bring them in, I'm gonna get more money, because when you buy it off the web, I get less, because the publisher takes a chunk. Okay? Just so you know. All right, Isaiah 40, verse 26. When we look here in Isaiah 40, this verse is one of my favorite. This is the verse Kepler, one of the verses Kepler used in the 1620s to be able to figure out the pattern of planetary motion in his law. And he was a Christian, and the Bible is where he went to for a source of information, because he knew from observations, just shadows that you would see with clocks. You could actually tell, or statues or anything. As the shadow moves, you could tell that there's motion in the universe, or in the planets. They knew that. He has about 80 pages of notes where he was trying to figure out the geometric pattern for the planets. In other words, because of Isaiah 40, he would study and try different geometries, circular, elliptical, square, parabolic, whatever it is, to see if he could figure out the periodic motion of a planet around the sun. And so you can go on YouTube and you can see a lot of his notes and how he finally figured out it wasn't a perfect circle, it was elliptical, by math, because of the Bible. Is that not insane? All right, so here we go. Isaiah 40, verse 26. If I read it first, it says, I'll start at 25. To whom then will you liken me, or to whom shall I be equal, says the Holy One. So Yahweh is clearly starting out by separating himself from any other god that existed at the time. This is around 730 BC. You had heavy influence from Baal worship. A lot of the Canaanite worship that's going around in the area. So again, you have Isaiah taking the word of God and proclaiming there's nobody like him. And he says it this way. Lift up your eyes on high. See who has created these things. Who brings out their host by number, who calls them all by name, by the greatness of his might and the strength of his power, not one is missing. He just put physics into the Bible. I'm right now I'm doing pretty heavy online debating about abortion. You know, I'm writing my articles, a series of articles on abortion, and I'm always amazed at the silly arguments I get for why abortion is God's plan. Those kind of things, just insane ways of thinking. But then there's another one I jumped into because, I don't know if you know this, President Trump was actually tweeting about how he thinks it's a real good idea to teach the Bible in school. Have you seen that? And so, believe it or not, conservative Christians are attacking him that it's not a good idea. Because we're drinking the Kool-Aid that there's a separation between real education and the Bible. So I put in there, I said, oh, that's a great idea. And so, of course, everybody's wanting to know why I think that way. Well, here's an example. And if you dig into what the Bible's saying, what God is talking about, you'll see it. And Kepler for sure saw it. Okay, here's a verse. So the first one, lift up, the Hebrew means to stare upward. We talked about this last week, so it doesn't mean take a glance. It doesn't mean take a glance. It means very similar to what Jesus said about the lilies of the field when he said, consider, right? So it means, literally, this is an intellectual pursuit where you're staring at something to understand it. And then he comes in. It doesn't mean visually see, so it doesn't mean take a look and observe what's going on. That word, again, means mentally, intellectually, understand what you're seeing. This is what Kepler was doing. This word created is the same word as Genesis 1:1. This is Genesis 1:1. So God is saying here through Isaiah, he's saying, and see who has caused to exist what's never existed. That's the translation. Who brought into existence what never existed. So we all think Genesis 1:1 is the verse. It's throughout the Bible. It's constantly the same things being taught. Here's where I love where it gets interesting. The word host in the Hebrew means an organized army under command. We think of that word probably as stars or planets. Take a look at all the stars and planets. Isaiah is saying, look at the army that's under command by a general. Now right away, what does it make you think? Huh? Have you ever seen the movie Glory? It's one of my all-time favorite movies. It's a man's movie, I admit. But when the first black regiment is first being led by General Shaw, they're all over the place, right? So everybody's laughing because they're not an army. Why are they not an army? Yeah, they're not organized at all. You get where this is going?
Kind of like today's communion.
Huh?
Kind of like today's communion. When you see it, you'll understand.
Yeah, this is a situation where God is specifically choosing a word in the Hebrew because he's trying to get humans like us to understand what he's talking about. He's talking about an organized regiment under command. Again, think what Kepler's thinking. If that's true, I'm a Christian, I believe in the Lord, I should, as a scientist, be able to see this. I should be able to study and deduce from what the scripture's telling me that that's true. And he says they're actually innumerable. There's so many of them that every time you look, there's actually more that you can't see. So as we studied on the first lesson on origins, remember when Hubble started expanding the number of galaxies and planets because the telescope was getting better and better? And guess what we keep finding? The same order. There's no chaos out there. Everything's moving according to rules. Here's what's cool. But then it says he calls them. So you have the creator of the universe, the general of the host in the heavens, who actually addresses them in a public proclamation. These aren't some things he made up and threw out there. They're very personal to him, right? He's got them set up in a certain way. But then he says, by name. The word there in the Hebrew is Shem, right? Have you heard the verse Proverbs 18:10 when it says, the name of the Lord is a strong tower, the righteous run to it and are safe? It's the same word here. The word name means character, the memorial of who that person is. So God actually gives names for honor and authority to all his created celestial objects. Pretty awesome. He knows every one of them. You know when he says, when Jesus is talking about not to worry, and he talks about the sparrow, right? A sparrow doesn't fall without our Father knowing it. Well, this is going even more crazy. There's not a planet out there or any celestial body that he hasn't named and knows. Now, this is my favorite one, though. When you think of the word, again, we are in Lee Summit. We're Westerners. We think of the word missing. What do you think of for missing? Yeah, it's lost. It's not what it means. This is the link. The word missing is the link with host. He's saying you'll never find one of these celestial bodies falling out of rank. So think of the movie Glory. By the time, remember that scene when The secession general, he hasn't gotten away from him yet, so he takes them, I think they're in South Carolina maybe, and he takes them on a raid, and they run into,
Excuse me, somebody dropped some money on the stairwell. I'll be upstairs. If you find out it's yours, I got it.
how much is it?
I can't tell you that.
He knows we're liars, okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
It's okay. So, when they marched into South Carolina, I think it is, remember the Colonel Shaw, played by Matthew Broderick, refuses to participate in burning down the town. And he says, the bad guy says, well, if you don't take my command, I'm gonna put all your soldiers under me, and we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna force them to do it. So he does it, but you see the army under him. They're just wild, right? They're doing all kinds of horrible things. But his guys, he's trained enough that they're under specific command and order. It's amazing. This is exactly what this is what Kepler saw. This is what Newton discovered in the Bible. It's not like Vedic literature with the Hindus. You can't make out what the heck's going on. God's very specific to explain how he operates. Does this make sense? Okay, so this is an example of the discovery of mathematical order in the universe and how it ended up moving to laws, from Kepler's third law of motion to Newton's law of gravity, and finally Einstein leveraging off of Newton for him to come up with general theory. Okay, now, real interesting, because as we get into fine-tuning, you guys know there's only 4, I just ate a donut and I'm gonna be burping this whole time, I can tell. There's only 4 forces in the universe, that's it. There's only 4. I mean, sometimes we get a little confused, we think of all these things going on, but there's just 4. These are them. You have gravity, electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. So in lesson 2.4 in the book, a very detailed run through of these laws. All right? You can go in the book and study to your heart's desire what these laws are, or what these forces are. But what's really interesting, did you know, again, using the Bible, they point to the Creator, and they point actually to Jesus Christ. People go, yeah, I knew that. Well, see, we'll never get taught this in school. This ain't gonna happen. So, unless we find a way to teach our young people and parents understand this, it's gonna be difficult to be able to train up our folks to understand this. So, let's take a look. Example, the atom is held together by electromagnetic interactions, and you probably get that because you have negative charge on an electron, positive on a proton, neutral on a nucleus. The proton and the neutron are in the nucleus, the electron moves around it. It's the ionic charge that's holding that together, that pattern. But the reality is, when you get inside the nucleus, this is what causes a nuclear bomb. It's the strong nuclear force. That's how you get a nuclear bomb. If you were to read in lesson 2.4 where I talk about nuclear fission, how do you get a bomb? How is that bomb devastating when it was dropped on Japan? It's because of a fission reactor where they shoot a particle into the nucleus to cause it to break apart. That releases the strong nuclear force, which is the strongest force in existence. It's crazy. So, here's what I find fascinating. Is there any wisdom literature out there that tells me how this works, how these forces work? So, in your book, we go through, in lesson 2.5, Colossians, 2 Peter, and Hebrews. Who on earth would think that if I wanted to understand the origin of the nuclear forces that hold the universe together, I might find something in the Bible. Okay, in Colossians, here's what, when Paul is speaking, he puts it this way. In Colossians chapter 1, we've read this a million times, but I bet we haven't really thought about it. So I'm going to read this to you. It says, verse 11 in chapter 1, that you be strengthened with all might according to his glorious power for all patience and long suffering with joy. So what is that? What is Paul saying to the church in that verse? What is he trying to? He's kind of exhorting them that because of the power and might of Jesus Christ, that you would be strengthened by that with all might. So it's not your might, by his might, according to his power. Think about how silly that probably sounds to most people. You're going to be strengthened in your spirit according to his power. The way we usually talk about in church is, just be sanctified and love the Lord and separate yourself to him and all that. But it becomes almost, how do you ever really explain that? How do you explain that to people? Right? There's a sense of mystery there, and we tend to just accept it. But when it comes to talking to other people about it, we probably never talk about it. Because it's not easy to talk about, right? Especially in this culture. But then listen to what it says. Verse 12, giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in the light. He has delivered us from the power of darkness and translated us into the kingdom of Son of his love, in whom we have redemption through his body, the forgiveness of sins. Paul's fairly irritating because in a sentence he'll put so much information, it's like, what on earth did he just say? Right? There's a lot. So if you look at verse 14, he puts a preposition, in whom we have redemption. Right? So what is the in whom he's talking about? If you back up in verse 13, the kingdom of the Son of his, the Father's love. So he put us in the kingdom of the Son, and the reason the Father thinks the kingdom of the Son is so important is because the only way to be redeemed is through that Son's blood, right? And we keep going backwards, and he says, the inheritance of the saints. So all of a sudden, I've been inherited by the Father through the Son whom he loves because of the blood he shed. That's pretty much what's happening from 12 to 14. You follow me? So we read all that, and that makes sense, but guess what he's asking you to do? Use your brain. Verse 11 was like, I'm strengthened in his might by the power of his love and long suffering. Hallelujah. Let's rejoice. Life is great. Right? But then Paul explains it. Because his son died and shed his blood, you can sing that. It's because of a historical event, what really happened. So far, so good? Then he goes crazy on us. Verse 15, he's talking about Jesus Christ, the Son. He's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. He just inserted something very powerful. It wasn't a naked carpenter in Bronze Age Palestine who decided to die on a cross why we have forgiveness of sins. It's not why. It's because that naked carpenter is God Almighty, who never sinned, all-powerful, who humbled himself to come to earth in the form of a man and give his life. So if he wasn't the same as the Father, it wouldn't matter. So far, so good? Paul puts up, this is just the beginning of the book of Colossians. Then he goes crazy again. For by him all things were created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or power, all things were created through him and for him. It's getting crazy now. We're in verse 16, and all of a sudden we have creation is by him, it's through him, and it's for him. Do you see that? In verse 16, by him all things were created. That's just like saying, hey, I do all the vacuuming in our house. It's part of my chores. So the rugs were cleaned by me, right? So, but then when it says through me, now we've got an agency. Now we have agency, not just by me, right? Because you can have something done and you don't see it happening and you ask, how did that happen? You say, well, it was by blank. Through means very personal now. Now it's through this that it was done. But then he says it's created for him. He's created everything for himself. You follow me? This is deep. This is getting deep. Now this is a church in about 62 AD. You have Roman occupation. Christians are getting persecuted. And he's in here talking this stuff. He's talking it not to try to get them to feel good about themselves, that Christianity, I know you're scared to death, but this is a good thing because God loves you. He's saying this because it's true. Who on earth would stay in a church like this and follow this stuff if you know you're going to be put to death? This is throughout all the epistles. But then here comes our verse that relates to the forces. Verse 17. Now we just talked about he created everything. Then he says, he's before all things. He's eternal. And in him, look at this. This is nuts. In him, all things consist. If I told you that you could, there's a tunnel, you're on one end, and you could get to where you want to be if you went through the tunnel. You're at point A, and to get to point B, there's a tunnel that you can go through. So if I started out and I said, you can get to point B by the tunnel, what would that mean? Yeah, there's a way to get there. Hey, I see the tunnel. If I said, in order to get to point B, you have to go through the tunnel, what would that mean? You have to enter it, right? Then if I say to you, you have to get in the tunnel to get to point B, what does that mean? What happens when you're in a tunnel? You have no choice. You have to follow the tunnel. I can't get halfway through the tunnel and go, I'd rather go left about 10 feet, You're stuck. If I tell you you have to go through the tunnel in your mind, you're not in the tunnel yet. You're separate. You go, okay, through the tunnel. I see the tunnel's there. I can get there. The minute you're inside, the only thing you can do is follow the tunnel. You don't have a choice. Is this making sense? This is what it means to be in Christ. To be in Jesus Christ means you have no option. He is the one you follow. It's about this slavery thing. You're either a slave to unrighteousness or a slave to righteousness. So here in this verse he's saying, it's actually in him that all things consist. If you take the image of the tunnel, the universe and everything is, I'll say, in the tunnel. It's in Christ. So the word consist, in the Greek it means hold together. It literally means to stay in place. The universe is in the tunnel. See, he created everything. The reason why he doesn't say everything was created in him is because he's the agent who brings everything into existence. But when he brought it into existence, the four forces didn't come, 50 years later. They had to be there at that very moment. They had to be in operation the minute it came into existence, or you wouldn't have the planets orbiting the way they are. This is another difficult thing for the non-believer. Stephen Hawking says, actually, gravity acted on after the explosion to make order. So gravity came along and started acting to bring things into order and complexity. The problem with that statement is that gravity isn't a thing. It's not anything. We describe gravity. We don't even know what it is. Gravity is something we made up with an equation to deduce from what's happening. The Bible's telling us who's holding it together. It's Christ. It's the stemma. So, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. So at creation, Proverbs chapter 8, the master craftsman, boom, he creates everything. And then at that moment of creation, everything's under control by him. He's the one controlling.
It's a good example of the triune nature of God.
Absolutely. Genesis 1:1. You see all three right there. Now, we can't teach this in school. Too religious, you know? But yet, most scientists that you find will acknowledge we have a universe from nothing, and we have laws operating they can't explain, that are moment by moment holding things together. And Paul is sitting here saying, actually, it's Christ. The universe is in Christ. It operates according to the forces that were set in place by him. He has designed everything to operate this way. If you look through the greatest scientists in history, John Maxwell, James Maxwell was a devout Christian who came up. He won the Nobel Prize for electromagnetism. And he did the same thing, studied the universe. This is the CFO of my company. You know what he's asking me to do? You guys are going to love this. To do statistical analysis to prove the level of variation we're seeing in our business and what are the causal effects of it. I'm not kidding you. What we are doing today in this class is exactly the way businesses work. It's exactly the way they work. So I do all kinds of statistics for him so he can understand accuracy and precision versus randomness. And we're sitting here with scientists doing the same thing, saying, hey, this is impossible to be unguided. So we know that when we see precision we're going to get to in the universe, it can't be from natural causes. It's impossible. So then you have Hebrews. Same word in Hebrews chapter 1. When it's talking about Christ, it means to bear, carry, or support. Literally, the forces in the universe are responsible for this control, and the Bible's telling you, and everybody knows this, scientists will agree, these forces could not come into existence later from the Big Bang. Everything had to be set up at that moment. And remember last week we said, every force, everything we know about the universe can be described by equations on one side of a piece of paper. That never happens from random, unguided events. Is this not cool? You guys follow me? Okay. So that's the end of my team will be a forecast, part of it. There it is, risk assessment. Got it, yeah. This is why I love my job. You wouldn't believe how many times I get to witness to explain this stuff that I do in relation to the universe and in relation to Christ. I just had one of our pastors asking me about an issue on whether or not the Bible's true. And you can use statistics to show it couldn't be, or with all the manuscripts, it couldn't possibly have been written by men. It's impossible, all this the way it came together. So we're going to get into that. All right, so now we're ready for the next lesson. Now we're getting into fine-tuning. So we've talked about origins. We've talked about design. Now we're going into something called fine-tuning. Okay? So in this one, it's just like it sounds. Just like it sounds, fine-tuning. If someone were to say to you, I need you to fine-tune your calorie intake, because if you really want to lose weight, you've got to have a better method of tuning what you eat. What would I mean by that? What do you think I meant, what I mean by that?
It's not just eating healthy food, it's finding the amount of, it's
Right
small
ratios.
things, yeah, right.
Right ratios of macros that.
You gotta design it, and you gotta control it, and you gotta have a target, right? You gotta be able to say, if I wanna lose so many pounds per week, here's the max calorie intake I can take, and I wanna make sure the calorie intake I'm taking is actually benefiting my body, not just junk, and so I'm actually gonna tune my calorie intake to get my results. This is what we're seeing in the universe. Okay, remember what I talked about, just to remind you now, we're into this week. I'm going this way and I should be going that way, so I'm gonna use my cursor. All right, so I tell you the pages, those of you who are interested in scholarships, I tell you the pages, we're in the fine tuning, it's gonna be 2 lessons. We're in this lesson here, 11, and 57 to 69 is in your book, so it's good. You should have read them for today. Probably some people didn't, but you should. Next week, you see the next set of lessons, pages, right? Roughly 2 or 3 pages a day to just read if you want to keep up on this and be able to follow what we talk about in class. Okay. All right, here we go. Fine tuning. So, we've got, this is the 3rd argument for God. We're going to go through in book 2, chapter 3 has 9 sections to it. And we're going to be looking at some of these videos. Today we'll look at a couple of them, okay? Okay. We talked about, now again, these 8 arguments for God that we're looking at here. We've got a total of 10 that we go in depth on. These are the more scientific ones. We're going through these in this book 2 part. We've already done the origin. We just finished design. So now we're looking at fine tuning. Okay? You see how crazy this is? It is overwhelming, the amount of evidence for the God of the Bible. I just got to tell you, I don't, I've had these conversations with Phil. I don't believe evidence leads a person to be a Christian. I'm not saying that. The reason we do this class again, number one, to make Christians better equipped and excited about their relationship in Jesus Christ and how to share it. Because we're in a culture that thinks these are crazy. That's because they haven't studied them enough. They're just copying and pasting YouTube articles. They're not taking the time to study. So we want to be equipped and excited about who Christ is, so that our ultimate goal when we're working with someone and helping them is to share the gospel. Remember we said that over and over again? Share the gospel. And what do we mean by that? Well, we've been through the essentials of the gospel already. We talked about all these areas in book 1, when we were going through book 1. And the one that applies here is what's going on in our culture today, right? Oh, he doesn't exist. I mean, I was just talking, who was I just talking to about this? Dustin was teaching before this class. And he was talking about, he's doing D2 in this room before us. And we were talking about the fact that just watch what's going on in our culture. I mean, you actually have someone so committed to socialism that they would kick Amazon out of New York City. I mean, I'm just blown away at all the jobs that were there for people. And someone who would actually say they want to get rid of all cows, they don't want airplanes anymore, right? Because they want everything to be green. I mean, when you sit and listen, you have to ask yourself, this is a person with a degree in economics. How did she get elected, of course? How did she get there to think that way? How did she get there?
You have to look at the district where the person comes from, the makeup of the people there. What's the culture?
You bet. So, with that said, how did we get to a culture, a subculture even like that? How did this happen? Okay, so picture the early 1900s, late 1800s, where literally Harvard University is founded on theology, right? Yale, Princeton, they're all founded by pastors or missionaries. And all of them. And literally, religious studies is called the Queen of the Sciences. That's what it's known as. The Queen of the Sciences. theology. What do you think it's called today?
Heresy.
Heresy, yeah, it's like whatever. You start marching along where fundamental evangelicals leave the universities. They start coming together in churches because they believe their job is to save the world, so they're going to leave schools and the public institutions and in churches come up with strategies for how to share the gospel, and they make the critical flaw you could ever make. They're no longer in the world. So guess who comes in and fills those seats? So out of the top 10 most widely known atheists, 2 of them are at Duke University running the philosophy department in the sciences. And you've got North Carolina, UNC, has the head of religious studies as an atheist. You have Texas, Austin, atheist. I mean, you see them everywhere now. So we've got an education system now that has literally said, even these Christians online that I'm debating, it's a good idea to not teach the Bible anymore. Then you have the 10 Commandments. You know, I don't think it's a good idea to say that you shouldn't lie. I don't think it's smart to say you shouldn't sleep with your neighbor's wife. I don't know if I want to tell people they shouldn't murder. Well, they know those are good ideas, but they're tied to God. So we have the 10 Commandments now. So how are kids being raised? What is the instrument we use or the institution for raising kids to have a biblical Christ-centered worldview? What is it? Well, I'm going to say institution. You've got the home and you've got the church. That's what we have. Church is not doing it. Most of the parents don't know what to do. So all I'm saying is this is why it's so critical that we have this foundation in reality and reason in this country, because in our cultures, they believe reason is science. And I'm saying if that were true, it points to the Bible. Okay, so we talked about these building blocks where we're looking in 3 areas. We started creation, and in creation we're looking at origins, design, and then we're going to be looking at biochemistry, the design of life. So we just went through all those building blocks for origins. We went through several of them, and we're on our last 2 now for design, and then we're going to get into life, right? And our point was, as we learn the evidence that the universe is created, and we learn the evidence that the universe was designed, and on top of that, we learn the evidence that living systems were designed, we should get more passionate about knowing who this designer is. And the Bible keeps bringing it back to one person all the time. It's this naked carpenter on the cross. This is the guy. This is the creator of the universe. It's making sense? Now, what we're doing is we're going there intellectually. That's what we're really doing. But in here, we're not just going through arguments on time and scripture, and there's nothing more important than knowing the Bible. If you know the Bible, these things now, your eyes are open because you see it. It's everywhere in the Bible. Okay, finely tuned universe and an anthropic principle. So here's the argument for fine-tuning. Precision in a system infers an intelligent designer. Is that true? Yes or no? Because if that's false, everything else falls apart. When I see precision, don't I think somebody did it? There's great precision in the universe. See how easy this is? Therefore, there has to be a designer. This is not hard, right? All you have to do is look at the precision. So you know what I love to do? Is there any wisdom literature that tells me the universe was made by an intelligent designer? It's all over the place. Jeremiah, O Lord God, behold, you have made the heavens and the earth by your great power and your outstretched arm. There's nothing too hard for you. The word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, saying, behold, I am the Lord God of all flesh. Is there anything too hard for me? As I told you, there's over 200 verses throughout the Bible where it specifically points to God as being the designer behind the universe, who put everything into existence. So the word made there isn't bara. It's another word that means fashioned to be in order. There's a difference between creating and making. When it says God made Adam, that's a different word than creation. Because he takes Adam and he fashions him basically out of all the elements in the universe or in the earth. He puts Adam together. So we're going to look at Psalm 19, Psalm 8, and Isaiah 45. Okay, let's go back. Here's our first video.
In 1966, Time magazine ran a cover story asking, "Is God dead?" The cover reflected the fact that many people had accepted the cultural narrative that God is obsolete, that as science progresses, there's less need for a God to explain the universe. It turns out, though, that the rumors of God's death were premature. In fact, perhaps the best arguments for his existence come from, of all places, science itself. Here's the story. The same year Time featured its now famous headline, the astronomer Carl Sagan announced that there were two necessary criteria for a planet to support life: the right kind of star and a planet the right distance from that star. Given the roughly octillion planets in the universe, that's one followed by 24 zeros, there should have been about septillion planets, that's one followed by 21 zeros, capable of supporting life. With such spectacular odds, scientists were optimistic that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, known by its initials SETI, an ambitious project launched in the 1960s, was sure to turn up something soon. With a vast radio telescopic network, scientists listened for signals that resembled coded intelligence. But as the years passed, the silence from the universe was deafening. As of 2014, researchers have discovered precisely bupkis, nada, zilch, which is to say zero followed by an infinite number of zeros. What happened? As our knowledge of the universe increased, it became clear that there were, in fact, far more factors necessary for life, let alone intelligent life, than Sagan supposed. His two parameters grew to 10, then 20, and then 50, which meant that the number of potentially life-supporting planets decreased accordingly. The number dropped to a few thousand planets and kept on plummeting. Even SETI proponents acknowledged the problem. Peter Schenkel wrote in a 2006 piece for Skeptical Inquirer, a magazine that strongly affirms atheism, "In light of new findings and insights, we should quietly admit that the early estimates may no longer be tenable." Today, there are more than 200 known parameters necessary for a planet to support life, every single one of which must be perfectly met or the whole thing falls apart. For example, without a massive gravity-rich planet like Jupiter nearby to draw away asteroids, Earth would be more like an interstellar dartboard than the verdant orb that it is. Simply put, the odds against life in the universe are astonishing. Yet, here we are, not only existing, but talking about existing. What can account for it? Can every one of those many parameters have been perfectly met by accident? At what point is it fair to admit that it is science itself that suggests that we cannot be the result of random forces? Doesn't assuming that an intelligence created these perfect conditions in fact require far less faith than believing that a life-sustaining Earth just happened to beat the inconceivable odds? But wait, there's more. The fine-tuning necessary for life to exist on a planet is nothing compared with the fine-tuning required for the universe to exist at all. For example, astrophysicists now know that the values of the four fundamental forces, gravity, the electromagnetic force, and the strong and weak nuclear forces, were determined less than 1/1,000,000th of a second after the Big Bang. Alter any one of these four values ever so slightly, and the universe as we know it could not exist. For instance, if the ratio between the strong nuclear force and the electromagnetic force had been off by the tiniest fraction of the tiniest inconceivable fraction, then no stars could have formed at all. Multiply that single parameter by all the other necessary conditions, and the odds against the universe existing are so heart-stoppingly astronomical that the notion that it all just happened defies common sense. It would be like tossing a coin and having it come up heads 10 quintillion times in a row. I don't think so. Fred Hoyle, the astronomer who coined the term Big Bang, said that his atheism was greatly shaken by these developments. One of the world's most renowned theoretical physicists, Paul Davies, has said that the appearance of design is overwhelming. Even the late Christopher Hitchens, one of atheism's most aggressive proponents, conceded that without question the fine-tuning argument was the most powerful argument of the other side. Oxford University professor of mathematics, Dr. John Lennox, has said, the more we get to know about our universe, the more the hypothesis that there is a creator gains in credibility as the best explanation of why we are here. The greatest miracle of all time is the universe. It is the miracle of all miracles, one that inescapably points to something or someone beyond itself. I'm Eric Metaxas for Prager University.
What do you think?
Join Prager University. Click here to...
Is that cool? I mean, you really, anybody can understand that. And we should be excited about our Christian worldview, about trusting Christ when you see stuff like that. Because you know the scientists now are putting out this information, and there are no arguments. As a matter of fact, this is one of the best arguments against Darwinian evolution. That it's so precisely controlled in the universe. How could you randomly end up with a human being from polywog? It just makes no sense. Okay. Tony Rothman, PhD in physics from Princeton, said when confronted with the order and beauty of the universe and the strange coincidences of nature, it's very tempting to take the leap of faith from science into religion. I'm sure many physicists want to, I only wish they didn't get it. This guy's a Christian, he's a great guy. I love listening to some of his lectures. He says, I believe in a personal God who acts and interacts with creation. I believe the observations of the orderliness of the physical universe and the apparent exceptional fine-tuning of the conditions of the universe for the development of life suggest that an intelligent creator is responsible. I believe in God because of a personal faith consistent with what I know about science. Faith and science are not opposing at all. Like Metaxas said, science points more and more towards theistic worldview, and specifically Christianity. Now, why would I say it points more towards Christianity? Why not some other theistic God like Allah or the God of the Old Testament, say Judaism? Why would I say it points to a Christian God?
Matches up with the Bible, what the Bible says.
Okay, but it matches in the Old Testament. I'm using Old Testament verses too, right?
It's the same God.
Huh?
The Old Testament God is their Christian God also.
Well, if you said that, if you're talking to a Jew, would he believe Jesus Christ is the same God of the Old Testament? No. Why did Jesus Christ come? Let me make it simpler. What's the best known verse in the Bible? John 3:16. Can someone say it? So you have a verse where the Apostle John, who was an apologist, where he's saying the reason Jesus Christ comes into the world is because God loves the world. The reason fine-tuning points to Christianity is because fine-tuning is an act of the will. All these little knobs you're controlling, all these things that are held together precisely, have to be done by someone who decided to do so all the time. He's constantly making sure and holding it that way. So you have the expression of a will, a person who's decided to operate and behave this way. You don't have that in Islam. And then God describes what his will is. What is the will of God? That none should perish, all should have everlasting life. So as you examine behind the curtain of fine-tuning, like, okay, so who could this possibly be? Allah's unknowable. He's not personal. You'll never be able to learn anything about him. They're afraid of him. He has three major names. He's Allah the hater, he's Allah the distant one, or he's Allah the, I forget the third one. I don't want to say the wrong name. I want to say the attacker or the judge. You know, he has names that reflect, watch out when you stand before him. Okay, so what God, if you're looking, best fits the description of why the universe is designed specifically so I can exist? When you study it, there's only one. It's this New Testament God who did it because he loves me. And when we have the Old and the New Testament, the Old Testament is being revealed by the New Testament. They come together. Does this make sense? Fred Hoyle, who he was talking about, look at the way he put it. Some super calculating intellect must have designed the properties of the carbon atom. This is the first thing he looked at that drove him crazy and made him realize there had to be a designer. Otherwise, the chance of my finding such an atom through the blind forces of nature would be minuscule. A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. He's shooting down evolution. He's shooting down the Big Bang without a designer. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to be so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. And yet, he moved from atheism to deism, but he wouldn't move to theism. Because the evidence isn't what converts a person. The evidence should excite you who love Jesus Christ because you realize here he is, he's acting. You've got to get to the heart of a person to be willing to surrender their life to this God who controls everything and says that he is a solution for your sin. That's the problem with people. So, let's take a look at the beginning of Psalm 19. We're going to go line by line through Psalm 19. This is one of the great, honestly, the great joys of this class for me, is that you can take biblical truth and you can use it to get a better understanding of who God is. In Psalm 19, we're going to go through the whole thing to this class and next week. It starts out, it says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, night unto night reveals knowledge. There's no speech nor language where his voice is not heard. This is incredible what's being said here, actually. When we go through this, you'll understand better. Their line, it's not his line, their line goes out through all the earth and his words to the end of the world. Okay? So, heavens, Shamayim, it's a plural word like Elohim that you have for God in Genesis, and it's talking about the space-time universe. In the beginning, God created the what? Heavens, same word here, right? This is the space-time universe, the whole thing. It's a plural term. They declare. The Hebrew word isn't like what we think. Okay, they declared it. This is a continuous form of the verb in Hebrew for are declaring. What it means is the heavens never stop. They are always continuously declaring. So it's nonstop, every second of the day, all day long. This is what Kepler found again in Isaiah 45, Isaiah 40:26, when he's observing, because the shadows never go away. At nighttime, it's moving around on a different side, so it's dark, and then it comes back and it's light again. So the heavens are giving a message constantly all the time. See, Phil can't do that, right? He preaches and he's tired, he goes to bed, and then he comes back on a Sunday night, and then he comes back Sunday morning. So he only does it intermittently. The heavens are doing it 24/7 everywhere. Just think about that. This is what David's telling us. He says, the splendor and the significance of God is being preached 24/7 by his army that never falls out of rank. You follow me? Okay. And then it says, and the firmament, the spread out thinness, okay? The space. So this is now being broken down into the universe that we observe. That spread out thinness shows his labor. So you can see the labor or activity of the Creator by the preaching that's going on by the celestial heavens. You guys, I know it's hard to wrap your head around this. Remember, Paul is telling the church in Colossae, he's saying, everything's being held together all the time by Christ. This is what's happening here as well. It's throughout the Bible. They're saying, pay attention, look at what's going on, everything's in order, nothing ever moves. It's God's glory being manifested in the universe. It's not unguided process, it's a person, and he's holding everything the way it is. Here's what it means. I love this. Day unto day, there's never an intermission. The heavens never take a rest. They never take a break. Imagine if Phil preached 24/7. Matter of fact, did you ever notice when you're in the service that when he's up there, he's watching a clock, a digital clock? Why is he doing that?
He's trying to keep his sermon to about 45 minutes.
Why?
So he's not there all day.
Oh, because he knows people are going to get bored or people are going to get impatient. Do you know when Spurgeon used to preach, it could be all day? When you look back during the Reformation time and the revivals in the U.S., this was like, it could go 2 weeks. I mean, people were literally having food brought to them. They weren't leaving the tents. It was crazy. What do we do today? We got the Chiefs on later, or, I got stuff, I got to go do laundry, hey, hurry up and give me something to hold me over till next week kind of thing, right? What he's trying to get you to see with creation, that's not how it works. It is all day long, nonstop, 24/7. It's preaching something. But then look at this. Do you ever wonder how someone who doesn't understand English or who's never seen the Bible can come to Christ, can be a Christian? You ever thought about that? So what you have here is it says, it doesn't speak in words. There's not a speech or a language where people won't understand what's going on. Ooh, it's quiet in here now. Job. Was Job a Jew? No. No. He wasn't Jewish. And that the book of Job starts out that there's not a more righteous guy around. How'd that happen? How did Job, and by the way, some even argue that it predates the Torah. The book of Job is one of the earliest books we have. So he didn't get the benefit of studying the Torah to figure out this God. How did he come to that? Abraham was from Ur of the Chaldees. How did he come to the Lord?
God reveals.
Yes, yes. I was preaching last Sunday night, right? And this Jewish woman came up to talk to me to tell me how, and it almost made me cry. She's talking about Yeshua. She wasn't talking about Jesus. She's talking about Yeshua in terms of Jewishness. How he revealed himself to her. That's how she became a Christian. It's crazy. So here you have the universe preaches in a language everyone can understand. Why do you think most people think there's probably a God? Because if you look at the universe, if you just look at things, no matter what they're teaching, most people struggle with what they're trying to teach in school. Because anybody with an open mind knows, hey, there's something more here. And David's telling us in the Psalms, You don't need to understand Hebrew, you don't need to understand Latin, you don't need to understand English, you don't even need a Bible. You can see that the universe preaches in every language. But then lastly, there's no place to hide. So the universe is preaching nonstop 24/7, and everybody can understand it, and there's no place on earth where it doesn't touch.
It also says that in what, Romans 1:20?
You mean right there? Yeah, this is amazing how this works. So people read that, and in one of our debates, you can see it online with the Atheist Coalition. They get very offended when you bring this verse up to them. In Romans chapter 1, it says, in verse 18, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So where God boils over in wrath is not over people's sin. It's over suppression of what's true. If he boiled over for when people sin, I'm a dead man. And everybody in this room is a dead man. What it is our reaction to when he reveals the solution for our sin. What do we do with it? And here he's saying, I hate nothing more than people who know what's true and suppress it. And not only suppress it, teach otherwise to people. It's a fact. Because Psalm 19 says, hey, my universe, my army in rank is telling people all day long. It's telling people all day long that I'm real. You have to suppress it to avoid it, because it's there all the time. And then he says, why does he get so mad for people to suppress it? Because what may be known of God, in other words, what you can understand about God, know intellectually. This isn't a warm fuzzy in your heart. This is actually being able to work it out in your mind. Is made manifest in them. We're back to the in thing. He's talking about your conscience, what you know internally, the way God's designed you. And then he says, because the reason your conscience struggles with it is because God has shown it to you. Psalm 19. God's revealed it. When you suppress it, you have intuitively this sense of not being sure or being uneasy about it by your conscience. When we study it as Christians, do we feel that way? Do we go, oh my gosh, the Bible teaches an orderly created universe. I feel kind of weird about that. No, we don't. Why not? Because the evidence backs up who he said he is. Everything lines up. It's kind of exciting, actually. Then he says in verse 20, how has he shown it to us? Since the creation, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. Psalm 19, clearly seen, even his eternal power and Godhead, so you don't have any excuse. By the way, that word excuse means unapologetic. See, we talk about apologetics because we want to present the case for who God is in our life. God is saying when you stand before him, you won't have an apologetic to defend yourself for your case for why you're okay. It's the opposite word. So, Psalm 19 is pretty awesome because he's saying, it's not like I hope you get lucky that you happen to be in a science class that teaches about physics and you go, whoa, now I get it. It's no, I'm preaching all day long. It's in front of everyone all the time. You can't miss it. You guys okay? Okay. This idea of this fine-tuning thing. This is exactly what my CFO was just wanting me to do, why he needs me today, which I hate him for. So we have this idea of accuracy but no precision. What accuracy is if you take all those points on that chart and I take the distance from the center, the bullseye, to it, when I average all those x's, I'll get a value that's on the bullseye. All right? What I mean by that is this side's on the negative, so it's a negative distance. This is on the positive. This is on the negative, that's a positive. When I add and sum them all up, I'm going to be in the center. but I'm accurate, but I'm not precise, because precise would be like that. But the problem is, I'm precise, but I'm not accurate, right? So if I had someone shooting arrows at a target and they did the accuracy thing, I would think that represents probably a fairly unskilled person with a bow and arrow, and they're all over the place. If I see the second one, what would I think? Huh? Yeah, or they got the bow and arrow set up on a fixture pointing at a point, it's hitting the point all the time, but they didn't align it to the center. Because I would think there's some kind of design going on the one on the right, but it's not hitting the intent. But when I see that, do I think, oh, isn't this cool? Random variation in an unguided process of all these variables resulted in an exact result that I wanted. Does anybody ever think that way? No. The thing I think is, somebody is responsible for that. Don't I? You know what's great about the God of the Bible? He's very common sense. He doesn't hit us with math equations and say, if you really want to go to heaven, you really got to understand how pi works. So, I mean, he doesn't do that stuff, right? He just says, just look around you. You know, actually, he's kind of annoying when he does that, right? I mean, he says, in the beginning, I created everything. Just trust me. Well, can't you explain general theory of relativity? Isn't there a chapter in Genesis on? He goes, no, you're fine. Just take a look at everything. You'll see it's me. It's like, God, come on, give me more. I want more. And he goes, no, that's enough. You know, you just trust me with that. Now, I say that, but on the flip side, when Moses is at the burning bush, right? And God says to him, hey, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go down to Egypt, and I want you to go to the Jews that are in captivity and just say, hey, I just want you to know, God sent me, and I'm here to set you free. So just follow me, and we're going to leave. Do you remember what Moses said? What did he do?
Said that they're not going to believe.
Yeah, I said, what are you, nuts? Are you serious? And number one, he said, they don't even, who should I say you are? I'm not even sure they're going to know your name. And so he tells them who he is. And then he says, well, wait a minute. Why should they believe me, right? Why should they? So what does he do? Huh? He does some weird things. Here's what he does. He goes, okay, here's what I want you to do. When you're down there and they're down on you, I want you to put your hand in your coat. I want you to take it out. It'll be lepers. Then I want you to put it in again and take it out. It'll be clean. And not only that, here, I'm going to give you a staff. I want you to throw it on the ground. It'll turn into a snake. And then I want you to pick it up, throw it on the ground, to stick again. What was he doing? He's giving them evidence. He's giving them evidence. You know what I would have done? I would have said, man, I picked the wrong guy. This guy's an idiot. I'm telling you, go tell them, and they'll listen to you. Stop arguing with me. He doesn't. When you read that section in Genesis or in Exodus, he's very patient with Moses. And he goes, here, take a couple of pieces of evidence so that they should see so you're not a normal person. This God's real. This is what fine-tuning is. God's doing it all the time. He's coming in here saying these things. So to be precise means to be minutely accurate, but to be fine-tuned means around a target. You can be precise and off target. When you're precise around a known value, a value you need to be at, something tuned it to that way. This is what we mean by fine-tuning. Does this make sense? Now, bear with me for a second. I'm going to go a little deeper. Just want to give you an example. For those of you who like math or statistics, all right, I promise I won't kill you, but I just want to share a little bit. And then we're going to get into some of these variables. So, how do you prove fine-tuning? In the work I do, how many people like math? I get a few, not many, and that makes total sense to me. All right, there's a difference between doing a derivative, calculating a derivative, and calculating a limit. I don't know if you remember limits, but you know, it's that funny little squiggly Latin term where two numbers. In partial derivatives or in derivative math, you start with a system, a full assembly, and you're trying to understand the parts that make up the system. In limit theory, you start with the pieces and you try to build the system. So you're starting with all the little pieces, like an automobile, and you're trying to put together how it works to get a car. In derivative math, you start with the car and you try to understand the critical variables that make up the car.
Reverse engineering.
Right. But anybody who designs anything always starts with a derivative. Let me explain. If you go to buy a car, you want to give your requirements for the system. In other words, do you want it to have a V8 engine? Do you want it to carry cargo of 6 people? Do you want gas mileage? You start with your requirements for the system. Then you design the components that will give you the system. Nobody goes in to buy a car and says, there's a certain carburetor I want, and I just want to explain the carburetor. And then, you know, when it comes to the radiator, it needs to operate a certain way. Nobody does that and have the guy sit there and go, hey, don't worry, ma'am. Let's take your carburetor, your radiator, and see what we come up with for a car. Right? You always start with system requirements. So, with fine tuning, you understand the system. Here. So, if a system has multiple variables that could influence how it behaves or its output, how do you tell which variable matters? You just heard from Eric Metaxas about all these variables. As an example, which you'll hear often on TV is, hey, we found water on a planet. I wonder if there's life. The existence of water is necessary but not sufficient. In other words, water won't give life. There's a ton of variables you need if you want to have life. So it's an equation. All these have to be met. Okay, so let's take a look. So if I have something simple, I have a box, and I want to fit 3 cubes in the box. And I'm at Christmas time, I make one of these, I give it to a friend, it's beautiful, it's stained, it's oak, they fit, and I think, awesome, it's a gift. He goes and tells people, and all of a sudden I've got 50 people who want boxes, and you know what, they're willing to pay me, it's pretty awesome. So now I can make a business out of this. When I made this box, the first one for my friend, I do what most of us do, like when we're doing stuff in the house for work. I file the blocks to make them fit, right? So because I'm making just one, I make sure I get the fit. But if I have to make 50 sets, am I going to be able to sit there and file 50 sets? And if I do, and it takes me 2 weeks, but I get them all done, and then someone comes along and, oh my gosh, I have 10,000 orders. How do I make sure that I'll always get 3 cubes to fit in that box? Huh? So I got an equation here. I come in and say, you know, if I was actually able to do orders for 1 million, the equation to get my average, which is accuracy, is pretty simple. The width of the box minus the width of each cube. I have to make 1 million of them, and I can retire. I can't sit there and file. Okay? This is how it works. What you're looking at here is you're looking at calculating the amount of variation I can expect in my target average. And it will be a function of the partial derivative of that equation to that variable, which means how strong is one variable to the overall, and then this term, the amount of variation for that variable. See, in fine-tuning in the universe, when they come back and say things like the ratio of electromagnetic to the strong nuclear force is almost perfect, that means this number is 0. So 0 squared is 0. So it doesn't matter the influence, this goes out of the term, this is gone. What's happening in the universe is that every variable they put in the equation to determine whether or not life is possible keeps zeroing out. That would be me being able to make 1 million cubes perfectly. Perfectly, with no failures. The equation to whether or not I can fit is a simple equation, again, it's statistics, where what I gotta make sure that the final value is always gonna be greater than 0, because anytime it's less than 0, I have interference, I can't fit the cubes. So there's a method we use in statistics all the time for calculating anything. I run these in business. This is what scientists do with fine tuning. And this is why they know it can't be random, because those terms wouldn't be 0. So let's look at one more.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would again be life prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence to suggest that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.
Is that cool? Okay, so here's where we'll end today. If in your book, I go through in lesson 3.2, every one of these, or 25, I'm sorry, 25 of the 50 that I've studied, finely tuned constants, and explain this chart. Here I'm starting out with just the constants. So I'll come in and I'll say, here's 7 of them. The number of electrons to protons has to be balanced within that number. Otherwise, galaxies can't form. You can't even have a planet. So in the book, I explain why that is, so you can read it. The ratio of a neutron to a proton, its mass, has to be within that percentage. Otherwise, the universe collapses and you can't have life. The decay rate of a proton, if it's greater than it is, you have life extermination, otherwise not enough matter. The ground state energies for helium, beryllium, carbon, or oxygen. Explain why life is impossible if they're any different by more than 4%. The expansion rate of the universe, it's just absurd how tight that is. You can't get galaxies because matter won't clump, or it will clump and everything collapses. The mass density of the universe, too much or too little deuterium or helium will cause life to be impossible. The uniformity of radiation, if it's smoother, they can't form galaxies and stars. If it's more coarse, you get black holes and emptiness, life's impossible. So that's looking at the constants, what I put in that equation for the cube, for the equations. Then if you look at forces, he just talked about the gravitational force. That's denominator, the 2 for the R. It's not 1.9996 or 2.0017. It's 2.00000. It has to be precise to 5 zeros, or else the orbits decay. You can't have life. Gravitational force itself. Stars will either burn up too fast or they'll never get hot enough. The electromagnetic force, stronger or weaker. Atoms won't share electrons or they can't hold on to them. With the ratio of electromagnetic to gravitational, look how tight that one is. You'll only get small stars, you can't get large ones otherwise. Again, I explain in the book why that's important. The strong nuclear force, if it's just different, strong to weak by these percentages, you won't have any hydrogen at the strong side. You'll only have hydrogen at the weak side. You can't have life. The weak nuclear force, strong or weak, matter converts in heavy, or it stays as light, you can't have life. This is absurd, right? What we're talking about here. Does any ancient text tell me there's an intelligent designer? Okay? So we keep coming back to this. Over and over again, God keeps saying this. You need to consider and pay attention that it's me. I'm the one doing all this stuff. Okay? Is this helpful? This is pretty intense thinking here. We've been through origins, design, halfway through fine-tuning. Next week we're going to finish it. And then we're going to get into life and the animal kingdom. Okay? And then